Hi, everybody. Great to see some familiar faces and some faces I've just spoke to on the phone. Welcome to the second session of our Administrators Virtual Forum. ECPL will be presenting several of these virtual forums in lieu of our in-person that we used to host professional learning sessions throughout the FY22 school year to address key topics that were reflective of administrator feedback and important early childhood topics. On behalf of ISB, we are happy to have Senator Cristina Pacione-Zayas with us today to discuss the Illinois Risk and Reach Report. The senator is also a senior policy advisor with Erickson Institute. The Risk and Reach Report presents county level data representing risk factors that could undermine optimal child development and compares them to the reach of publicly funded programs and services that support early childhood well-being. This session is going to highlight cover highlights from the report and tools to explore the data that can help your program create MOUs, transition to kindergarten plans, support for students experiencing homelessness, and recruitment and enrollment efforts. As always, the Early Childhood Department at ISB is here to support your work with the students of Illinois. Please reach out to your principal consultant with any questions you may have, or feel free to send an email to earlychi@isbe.net. We hope you find this session and the ones to come in the future beneficial. Thank you, and Christina, all yours.
Thank you for having me. Really excited to be in community with the folks who literally make the world go round in the early childhood space. Shout out, because early childhood, I think, is always the most important part of our educational continuum because it sets the foundation. So happy to be here with you all. I'm going to get us right into the presentation, and I encourage you, as mentioned before, type questions in the chat. I'm happy to be able to kind of try to integrate that as we go through to the extent that I can. And let me just make some arrangements here so that I can make sure that I've got this going on. Okay, so during today's presentation, I'm going to orient you to the Risk and Reach report as well as the website, and specifically highlight some key messages and spend time, of course, answering the questions as you integrate them in, or we'll reserve them towards the end if it's a little bit off topic. But let's level set. So the report contains 34 data points that provide a comprehensive snapshot of child well-being. And we produce this report every 2 years. The first report was released 2 years ago and features mostly 2016 data. So keep in mind that in 2016, we had the budget impasse. And so we were not operating with a complete budget, and that lasted through parts of 2018. So you can kind of see in terms of the 2016 data, it's a little bit of a reflection of the impact of that budget impasse. The second edition, which is what we're going to be looking at primarily and pointing to, although we'll show some comparables, it features mostly data from 2019, and that is obviously post the budget impasse. So definitely we'll be seeing the impact of that. In 2019 was the year where we had the most complete and recent data available at the time of the production of this particular report. And there was also greater confidence in terms of the data collection because while we were producing the report, there was some 2020 data available, but as you all know, we are in a pandemic, and that obviously puts some constraints on data quality. But essentially what the data you're looking at today is going to help you really kind of get a pre-pandemic baseline. So let's move along to the next slide. I want to acknowledge the partners who lent their experience to produce this report. Obviously, Erickson's Policy and Leadership Department, but also we have a strong partnership with the University of Illinois, specifically the Illinois Early Childhood Asset Map, ICAM, you all may know it, and also the Fiscal Policy Center from Voices for Illinois Children, which is now a part of the YWCA Metropolitan Chicago. As you can see at the bottom of the slide, we've got our funders who literally made this possible through their investments. And then I also want to acknowledge we don't do this work in a vacuum. We convene a 40+ stakeholder group of advisory council members who represent both the public and private sectors across the state. They have expertise in terms of child development, as well as program administration and the brain science. But essentially, their feedback ensures us that the report's going to be relevant, that it's timely, it's accessible, ultimately to reach our goal of it being actionable. So that's why I'm really excited that you all are here and hopefully can pull some ideas from it about how you want to design some programming and respond to the report. So let's go to the next slide. What do we mean by risk and reach, right? Risk are factors that undermine child development, but I really want to emphasize the importance that we define risk as being situated in the environment outside of an individual's control. It essentially removes the onus of circumstantial conditions from the child and allows us to focus on the root causes of these risk factors, and specifically to put under a microscope the systemic flaws. So we have 15 risk indicators in this report that I'll be going over shortly. Now, reach represents the publicly funded programs and services that support child well-being or mitigate those risk factors that we have outlined. These are just state and federal publicly funded reports, because the data from the locally funded programs are not included. We have 19 reach indicators in the report, bring together our 34 indicators of the risk and reach. Let's go to the next slide. I'm also really excited to announce that in addition to the report, we also have available the Illinois fiscal risk and reach fiscal scan, and that now shows literally the dollars and cents as well as the uptake from participants and enrollment, but the dollars and cents of early childhood investments from fiscal years 2018 all the way through 2021. And this interactive website where you're going to really be able to kind of mix and match data points and download some additional resources and tools. And those are going to be some of the features that I'm going to show you in a bit towards the end of this presentation. Okay, so I really want to emphasize the use of this report, because like I said, we don't do this work to just put a report up on a shelf and say, yay, report. No, we really want to provide you all with some opportunity here. And so how are we looking, to effectuate this report? It's designed to essentially illuminate strengths. What do we mean by that? How well are we as a state reaching children and specifically addressing their needs? The report also helps us to identify some trends so that we can better understand the direction in which we need to put our finite resources towards with respect to early childhood programming. Where are the gaps? Where are the needs? Where are the opportunities, right? And the opportunity, specifically, these data help us identify is where we can change policy, practice, and funding allocations. The data essentially, we see as a driver to be able to inform government and other stakeholders who really are charged with facilitating greater equity for our Illinois young children and their families. So with respect to this presentation, we're going to cover 3 areas and do some deep dives on the Illinois child population, as well as the comparison of the 2016 data maps. And we're going to then go through some of these tools and walk you through it and feel free to dive in on the website with me while I'm going through it with you. So let's move on to this next slide here. It's going to be a little overwhelming. It's complicated. We want to really make sure that you all understand some key pieces of the data. As I mentioned, the data primarily comes from the year 2019, and it reflects children when available 0 to 5. It's presented in the hard copy of the report, as well as some of the visuals on the website, through the form of tables and maps. And so, as you can see, as this window is populating, it is messy, it is complicated, it is overwhelming. But what we want to remind you is that the maps really should serve as a visual cue that prompts you to dig deeper into the actual numbers. The data also is categorized. As you see, there's some, blue coloring there, right? It's categorized from low to high risk or low to high reach. The lighter the blue indicates the lower the concentration of the particular risk factor, as well as the lower the concentration of the reach of a particular resource. And then as it gets darker, that increases the risk or the reach. But again, this is just a visual cue for you to look at the actual numbers, to start to kind of like discern what's happening in your county or what's happening in your legislative district. And there's also kind of a tendency to compare data from the first report to this current report, which, yes, there's some things that you can kind of, but what you have to understand is that what we have in these little maps here and in the tables, it's broken down by county. So data is available by county, and in some cases by legislative district, but the county data is calculated in relation to how it compares to other counties for that specific year. So the side-by-side comparison of the 2 years or the 2 counties, it doesn't account for shifts in population, such as like decreased birth rates, as well as program changes, which is such as eligibility requirements or decreases in funding. So I think it's just really important to keep that in mind as you're going through the data. Let's now go and level set here in terms of, getting us started on our grand state of Illinois. So as you see here, total population, right, in Illinois by race, ethnicity, and this is based on the 2019 community CSA, the community, why am I struggling on that one? ACS, hello, not CSA, the American Community Survey. Here we go. So I want to just start us off with the whole population in Illinois to just kind of provide some context here. As you see, 12.6 million, you see what the breakdown is by race, ethnicity, Asian 5.9, Black 14.6, Latinx 17.7, and white 60.8, and then 2.8% of people who are kind of in this other category don't really care for othering, but it just has to, it's somehow that's how it shakes out with when we are able to compare the data. In the 2.8%, those individuals identify as Native American, Alaskan, Hawaiian, as well as Pacific Islander, or individuals who identify as having 2 or more races. So now let's move on to the children. Let's zoom in on our children age 5 and under. And I'm sure you've noticed that the race ethnicity breakdown reveals greater diversity in our young child population. So we have close to 917,000 children under age 5. They make up 7.24% of that 12.6 million in our entire state. And as you can see that breakdown there by race, ethnicity, it shifts. And so like, I wanna, also just note this population tends to be undercounted. So we, while we have this number here, it is just an estimate. And so it's really important to, and then also, the American Community Survey is not as precise as when we actually do the census. Let's move on to the next. So now that 917,000, this is what it looks like in terms of like where they're concentrated across our state. So as I mentioned before, this map shows you the 102 counties. Each county has a color assigned to it based on the concentration of children 0 to 5 living in that specific county. Something to note is that we actually saw a 3% decrease in the child population from 2016. There was nearly 946,000 children 0 to 5. And as I mentioned, now we're at 917. The state has also just been generally experiencing a decrease in population for several years. Some of that does have to do with outward migration, but then there also just has been in general a downward trend with our birth rate. And as I mentioned before, we can always assume that there's an undercount of this particular population. Let's go on to the next slide here, because now I want you all to know when we were talking about those risk factors, the 15 of them, here they are. They're organized by 3 domains that, as you all know very well in early childhood, 3 core areas that we focus on is family stability, health, early care, and education. We're going to, kind of curate some of this specific to you all in talking with the folks who invited us so that we can better kind of meet your needs. So we're going to go over just not all of these, but you'll see we're going to go over poverty. You see the little stars popping up: homelessness, maltreatment, and kindergarten readiness. And then the next slide shows us what the REACH data is, right? And so these data, as I mentioned before, represent the publicly funded programs and services that can help us mitigate the risk factors. So for this presentation, we're going to focus on income assistance, housing assistance, mental health services, healthcare coverage, and publicly funded preschool. All of these indicators, we've added a couple since our last report because we wanted to be, again, attuned to the contemporary context of COVID and the pandemic, as well as, kind of monitoring some trends. And so with all of these, we vetted these specific data points, or the selection of it with our advisory council. But then I also want to just help you understand with the risk factors, they had to be a part of research. We needed to be able to identify those risk factors as a well-researched factor that could undermine child development. And then with the REACH data, obviously these are policy levers, like I said, to mitigate the risk factors, and everything that we are showing, we needed also to be available at the unit of analysis of the county level. So it doesn't mean that it's everything under the sun. We had some kind of constraints, but just so you get a sense of how we went through the selection process. So we're going to start first with family stability and some highlights, some key highlights here around family stability. And as you may have noticed, the first and foremost is poverty. We know that, children experiencing poverty may have greater exposure to other risk factors. Risk factors tend to, kind of travel in a pack. If you are experiencing poverty, you're likely experiencing housing instability. Your parent or caregiver is not able to obtain employment that's stable, that's a livable wage. All of those things kind of come together. And so, the one thing to kind of note here is that we did have a decrease of children 0 to 5 living in poverty. And the same is true when we disaggregate by race, ethnicity. But what you're going to actually see in the next slide, specifically as it relates to Black and Latinx young children, is the disproportionate impact of poverty compared to other racial and ethnic groups. So let's look at the next slide here. So what you see is the comparable, right? The 2016 in terms of the state rate being almost a little over 1 in 5 children living in poverty compared to a little under that in the 2019. And then you kind of see the, again, remember the map is the visual cue. So look around that map there and you can kind of see how and if the concentration of poverty of young children has moved across the state over the past few years. But look at those little peaks and valleys there, right? I want you to pay attention to the proportion. And like I said, how it's impacting specifically Black and Latinx children. And so one of the things that we really try to illuminate in this report when we look at data disaggregated by race ethnicity is really to try to kind of unpack what is each racial and ethnic group experiencing with respect to this risk factor, so that can then help inform us how we may need to target resources or be attuned to the nuances of different racial and ethnic groups as it relates to the provision of services and resources. Let's move on to this. And so I want to now highlight homelessness. And just something that you all, the way that we're counting homelessness. So this is, kindergarten students that are reported as homeless to the McKinney-Vento liaisons. And so, obviously there's some limitations with the data, right? Because this is all based on reporting. It may not be reflective of the true and actual picture. And so what you see is actually, in terms of the reporting, a slight increase in the state rate of kindergarten students reported as homeless. 2019, it was 1.97 compared to 1.8 in 2016. And again, this is another risk factor that we know can kind of compound to other risk factors, such as, if you have housing instability, there may be disruptions in your healthcare. There may be domestic violence you may be witnessing, and it can, all of this, housing instability can interrupt student learning. So let me now show you what this kind of looks like in brass tacks. So here's what those percentages translate into real numbers. You'll note that the race and ethnicity data is not available for this indicator. This is actually a great opportunity to advocate for disaggregated data. But if we look at the map, it starts to kind of prompt some questions. Does this data present a regional or a pocketed problem? Because you can see towards the bottom there, for both years, the bottom of the map in Southern Illinois, we show high, moderate, high risk for homelessness. So what's happening? That might be explaining the trends. Is it that we have better reporting systems in those particular areas? Or is it that we do have more young children experiencing homelessness? And so, it kind of provokes those questions, and then we start to get into kind of the solution mode. How close or far are families from the resources that they need? So let's move on to the next slide here, maltreatment. So maltreatment, this is the rate of reported abuse and neglect of children to the Department of Children and Family Services. These are indicated reports, meaning that they were founded. And so it's increased with 19 children per 1,000 ages 0 to 5 in 2019 compared to 14 per 1,000. See, we do a rate so that we can account for population differences across geographies. And so something to consider in this particular data point is that it may be attributed to an increase in reporting either by families or the Department of Children and Family Services. And also in conjunction with this increase in reports, there was a decrease in the percent of children getting placed in permanent homes within 12 months. In my conversations with the Illinois Collaboration on Youth, they actually feel that this is attributed to the fact that we were looking at 2019 is really the aftermath and the fallout of the budget impasse, which, totally unraveled safety net supports for families, which then increases the risk for abuse and neglect. In some cases, it may present more as neglect because your housing is unstable, your employment is not existent, your healthcare is interrupted, all of those things. So these are all things that, again, provoke conversation, because what you're probably thinking on some level is like, this data is kind of like blunt, right? It's at the county level. It's really not getting at, the community or the neighborhood that you all are super familiar with. And that's why it's incredibly important that you all as leaders have these conversations to kind of drill down and really understand, because we know that counties can be huge and there can be segments of those counties that are driving this particular rate that we're presenting versus really drilling down and getting in there. And so I want you to see this now, the side-by-side comparison in terms of that maltreatment piece. So looking at the race ethnicity data below, the red triangle represents Black children, and you're going to see those staggering disparities when we disaggregate by race. And so it prompts those questions. What's happening? What's happening in families that are Black? What resources are they not getting? How is the system harming them? Or how is the system not reaching them to get the resources that they need? Or is it a implicit bias at play when it comes to child abuse evaluation and reporting? Are Black families more scrutinized? These are all really important questions to interrogate. But again, going back to, we are not going to place the onus on the individuals. The purpose of looking at data at this aggregate level, at the bird's eye view, is to really look at how the system enables, benefits, undermines the development, the optimal development of young children. So let's move on to the next slide. Income assistance. So there was essentially no change in the rate of children benefiting from TANF, also known as the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, which provides a cash assistance and employment services benefit for parents. And if you look at the comparable in terms of the maps, and also too, because this is a reach, right? It's not a risk indicator. This is a reach. I want to orient you to these particular maps. So the blue shading is actually on our reach maps in the static maps, and not in all cases on that interactive website that I'm about to show you shortly. So the blue, it represents the overall risk of taking all 15 of those indicators. And so I want to explain what that means a little bit. So the overall risk levels for each county are assigned to each county based on their average score across 15 of those individual risk indicators. So, as I had gone through a few of them here, but those risk indicators include maternal education, poverty, parental employment, maternal morbidity, and the list goes on. The yellow dot in each of the county represents the reach data. So the bigger the dot, it's a density dot, the wider the reach, or the longer that it stretches. And in this case, the dots show the reach of the TANF program. So while there wasn't any kind of change at the state rate, digging into the data tells more of a story. In 2016, Christian County was at a high moderate overall risk with low reaching TANF. And then in 2019, the county moved to low moderate overall risk and an increase in TANF assistance. So those are some ways that you can kind of like drill down and say, hey, what happened here? What changes were made? Is it that there was a greater reach of TANF to families that brought down the overall risk that families and young children were experiencing? But again, who would know this? Local leaders. And that's why these data are here, to provoke those questions and discussions, and to perhaps even learn regionally how we can apply certain lessons learned across the state. The next slide goes into housing assistance. And see, this is one of those slides or one of these data points that's like more kind of general, the universe, right? This isn't just families with children 0 to 5. These are all families across the state. And so it's this, and this is one of the indicators where the latest data is more than a few years old. So there was essentially, no difference or very, very slight in the rate of households benefiting from the federal HUD housing assistance. But let's look at the maps right now to kind of see what that reach looks like. So here's what the data looks like in real numbers, right? So just over, 197,000 in 2015 and over 198,000 in 2017. And so, there's a cluster of southern counties that is showing higher reach, which again should spark some curiosity on what strategies they're using. Having these maps are, meant, as always, as I'm trying to kind of point out, to have these deeper conversations with the folks who are benefiting, with the folks who are tasked with implementing. It's really, the process by which we make meaning of the data, because I wouldn't be able to speak to that part of our state. I don't know it as well, but obviously folks do who are living in those particular areas. Let's go on to health. And so want to, start off with mental health. And so the state rate of children receiving mental health services shows a tiny tick downward in 2019. But we know these services are critical, and we are actually seeing the emotional toll the pandemic has had on our children. And thankfully, there's been some proactive moves on the side of government to really kind of double down on these particular investments. For example, in March of this year, Governor Pritzker established the Infant Early Childhood Mental Health Consultation Act. He signed that. That was a part of the Black Caucus's 4 pillars that we ran in January to really address kind of historic systemic racism and its manifestations in the areas of education, health, and economic opportunity, as well as the criminal legal system. And so that, this particular act lays out a couple things. It encourages the increase in the availability of services. It improves the communication materials for families and providers to know that these services are available. And it encourages agencies to provide more data on early childhood expulsions and suspensions, among other areas. And so one thing to also note, again, that demonstrative of the state's interest in doubling down on this investment, is to create a full-time position so that you have a coordinator at the state level to guide the expansion with this particular act, and also to have a database of mental health consultation providers to support the staff and the adults who care and educate young children. And, if you all have like PFAE, obviously this is something that's a part of your kind of kit and caboodle. Just so you can see what the maps look like in terms of the side-by-side comparison of the 2018 and the 2019 maps. And you're going to see there's some clusters in this across the state where mental health services is reaching children at a high level. And obviously we don't have the data available by race, ethnicity. Another note, caveat on this tip in terms of the data that you're seeing here, this represents a universe or a slice of the universe of children that are receiving mental health services under the age of 5. The universe in this is children 0 to 5 who are also recipients of All Kids, which is the state-funded Medicaid program. And of those kids, it's the ones who have been identified as being able to benefit from mental health and behavioral health services. And now All Kids is paying for those services. So it's not the entire universe of our children 0 to 5, but this was the closest we were able to get to begin to start to analyze, what are we doing with our resources with infant early childhood mental health services. Let's go to the next slide. Super important here, health coverage. So, to understand access to mental health services. Let's look at health coverage. And this is a new data set to the report. We did not have this before. And I want to like, the reason why we didn't have it before is in 2016, you know, the data had shown we had done a great job in terms of making sure that our young children were covered by publicly funded insurance. And then while we were in the production of that report, some new data came out saying that Illinois was slipping, and some of it may have been attributed to the chilling effect of public charge and other kind of administrative changes at the federal level that may have discouraged families from this. But anyways, the point is that the data that we have for this particular is only for 2019, since we didn't show it back in 2016. And in Illinois, you can see slightly over a third of children are enrolled in Medicaid. As I mentioned, the All Kids, the Children's Health Insurance Program, and other public insurance. So this does not take into account, you know, private insurance. And so I want to show you the map here, because let's look at some of the higher, the counties that have higher risk levels in terms of overall risk in the map. So these are these dark blue shaded areas, and there appears to be some good reach in these particular counties. So it begs that question: what strategies are these counties using to enroll kids, and can it be modeled in other counties where we don't see as much reach? And so I want to also give that caveat here too, is that the data includes the number of recipients who were enrolled at least one day during a specific period. So partial and full benefit is also included in this data. And as I mentioned, there's All Kids, and then there's the CHIP that's integrated in here. So, and as you can see, the race and ethnicity data are not available. We highlight that in the report. Again, opportunity to advocate for us to have more detailed data so that we can, again, monitor by race, ethnicity. Let's move on to the early care and education. This is your backyard here. And so, you know, I want to emphasize this point, kindergarten readiness, because that's all you all are working towards, right? So this data comes directly from the Kindergarten Individual Development Survey, KIDS. And so the number of children who are not prepared for kindergarten per the KIDS survey, meeting that threshold for readiness defined by the KIDS survey, was over 93,000 children in 2019. So that's over 12,000 more than in 2016. So let's look at these maps so we can try to kind of understand a little bit better what's happening. And so the shading of the map shows there was some shifting of where the risk lies in the state, having been more concentrated in the northern region of the state in 2016, and shifting a little bit south in 2019. And the race ethnicity data only shows that there's like some slight variations amongst the groups of children by race ethnicity. So super clear, we've got our work cut out for us. And not to mention that first year, you know, or the data from 2016 was from the first year that the Kindergarten Individual Development Survey was administered. So, you know, there's been a few years of being able to kind of refine the process and make sure that we have high quality data. So just want to kind of highlight that. Next slide here is looking at publicly funded preschool. So in 2019, the gap between available preschool slots and eligible children ages 3 and 4 years old, we're looking only at the 3-year-old cohort and the 4-year-old cohort, it was at 11,439 slots. In 2016, it was at 30,466. However, some factors to consider with the closing of that gap, right? The progress may be attributed to a decrease of eligible kids, which went from approximately 138,000 in 2016 to 122,000 in 2019. So just as I mentioned in other data points, really important to have the conversations and engage in the discussion to kind of understand more about the context of this data. How do we best interpret it? And let's move on to that so you can kind of see the map here. So one thing to note, since we're looking at a gap, is that in any other map here, it's opposite. So this is the only instance where the bigger the yellow dot equates the bigger the gap in available slots, not that we have greater reach. So just keep that in mind as you're looking here. And so counties with the smaller dots have less of a gap and are closer to ensuring children eligible for Head Start and Preschool for All and Preschool for All expansion, they have seats in the classrooms, okay? And either way you look at this, right, we still have a gap. It makes you think, what is happening with the kids who are eligible and not enrolled? Or the kids who are eligible and there aren't enough seats? Where are they going? What are the funding issues and who is directly impacted? Who's benefiting? Who's burdened? So let's, that was sort of the, the quick and dirty, I guess, of the customized presentation, just, to kind of spark your curiosity to go into this website, which we'll go into for a few minutes. But I want to give you some tools that you can use, right? I'm really trying to emphasize here that the data is only as good as you taking it back to your spaces and having the deliberate conversations about this. So, we wanted to be able to provide you all with some questions to drive the conversation. So as you see here, we've got a list of questions that can assist you with this. And so it's, something to kind of consider as you're looking at these questions, right? Data represents the lived experience, and that's why it's incredibly important to engage your parents, your community leaders, stakeholders outside of your programs or school districts, such as your, community-based providers, your home-based childcare, your municipality leadership, your park districts. These are just basically questions that are meant to identify trends and opportunities, and also to be intentional about racial equity. You, I'm sure, have heard quite a bit about that phrase coming from, state government, coming from the State Board of Education, coming from your own communities and spaces. And, I think it's really important that we be deliberate about these conversations and make sure that we're asking who's benefiting and who's burdened by the current systems and policies in place. And so, we're going to make this PowerPoint available for you afterwards so that you can have these questions to take back home with your folks. So now we're going to go to the website, and I think, Veronica, I'm going to share my screen so that I can take you around. Let me get this going. And also you'll notice the link is in the chat for the report and for being able to take a drive around the website. So if you want to join me on that tip, I am happy to take you around. Okay, let's get in mine. Okay, so here is the Risk and Reach website. This is our homepage here, right? And as you, here's the homepage. And what you'll notice on the homepage is we've got a little, 2-minute video to kind of refresh your memory about what the Risk and Reach report is. You can also, if you slide down this page here, you can download the reports. What's great about that, we just need to collect your information just so that we have a good grasp of who is actually using the reports, what kind of role do you play, and then if there's any update to the reports, we can easily email you. What I love about this is I don't have to wait for an email to come to me. As soon as I fill this out, I have access to the report. So you can download it to your own desktop and go from there. But I'm going to take you now to the actual interactive portion of the website, right? So I'm going to go to the interactive map here. And that's where we had landed initially. So, I want to show you here as we go through it on the left, right? You see kind of like your dashboard. You have 2016 data and you have 2019 data. Those are the 2 years you can toggle between. You can look at the data in terms of a unit of analysis, such as the county, or you can look at legislative districts in the Senate or the House. You also, you can hover over counties so that you can see the actual county data. And so I'm going to just show you, kind of do the basic on this, right? So we're looking right now at the overall risk. So remember those like 15 indicators that we sum up by county and we divide by the number of indicators to then get the overall risk score. So you've got here, and I want to also show you, not only do we have like the county level when you hover, but like if you slide down here, you actually have it by table format. So you can sort, you can also sort by, alphabetical order. You can type in, your county, Champaign, and it'll pop up. You'll be able to kind of like play with the data that way. You'll always have in this segment right here a little bit of a description, so you can better understand like, what is this data point, where does it come from, and where are the citations, and so on and so forth. So that's just the basic stuff, right? So I'm going to now kind of show you different ways you can play with this data as you're thinking about how you're better meeting the needs of your of the populations you serve. So let's start with under family stability. I am going to do 100% poverty level. Okay, you see how that just changed the map. And I am going to now look at the reach indicator of housing assistance. Okay, so as you will see here, how are we doing with the families that are living at 100% poverty level, usually are families that are eligible for Head Start, and how are we doing with reaching out to them with respect to housing? And so like, let's look at Macon, and what you see here in terms of, it'll show you the 2 indicators that we're looking at, right? So risk, 100% poverty, you see in Macon is 31.47%. Significantly higher the population that is experiencing, the proportion of the population that is experiencing high poverty there compared to the entire state. And then it gives you the numeric value. It quantifies the actual number of children. Remember, these are children 0 to 5. Then you look at, housing assistance. How is that reach of housing assistance? Well, you've got almost a comparable where you have 30.52% of the families that are eligible for federal housing assistance accessing that, compared to the state of Illinois. And then you see the number. Either way, the reach is high. It's considered high in comparison to the other counties. So, again, kind of emphasizing here what you can see, right? With the table just got a little bit more detailed here, right? But it'll show you this mix and match of the risk and reach. And again, you can sort in various ways. Like if I want to just sort based on looking at, the 100% poverty, I'm looking at this from the aspect of, I can sort, I'm sorry, I did 100% poverty, yes. And the poverty level, I can look at it by poverty level, all of our quote unquote low, the counties that have lower poverty level, or I can look at it vis-a-vis the higher one. And then I can look and see like, how are we doing over here? Like super interesting that you've got in Jackson County, you're considered at higher risk for poverty. You've got that, larger population that is experiencing poverty, but we have very low moderate reach when it comes to housing assistance. I'm going to show you now, let's see, a few of these, looking at some things that you all may be specifically interested in. Let's go back up here. I am going to do under the family stability. Let's look at maltreatment. And then we are going to look at that in relationship to permanency. Okay. So as you can see here, remember, maltreatment is described here. It is the indicated reports, children 0 to 5. It is a rate, remember, per 1,000 children. And then the permanency is being reunited and having permanent housing or permanent caregivership and within 12 months of entry into substitute care. So again, you can look at, let's look at Livingston County here. And you can see in Livingston County, the rate being 38 per 1,000 children 0 to 5, a significant proportion of the population there, compared to 19 per 1,000 across our state. And then the permanency rate is at 42.86%, which is significantly higher than the state rate of permanency. And so just, again, wanted to kind of give you that. I'm going to, because you all are PFA and PFA directors, let's look at one that's related to early childhood, the early care and access. And we're going to do kindergarten readiness, and we are going to do publicly funded preschool. So remember, kindergarten readiness, this is the number and percent of kindergarten students without not meeting that threshold for readiness across the state. And so that's what all the blue represents, right? The darker the blue, the higher the proportion of children not meeting that threshold. And then the reach of publicly funded preschool. So it's publicly funded preschool capacity and the gap between capacity and the number of children eligible. So looking at this one, let's select over here, Adams County. So in Adams County, we have a percentage of children, 63.57 in kindergarten, not meeting that threshold. Statistically, significantly lower than the rest of Illinois, right? But the gap actually is only 26 that are not able to access publicly funded preschool. So that actually is a smaller gap, and they're in the higher moderate. So the reach is working on some level. So again, looking at the table here, you can sort through, you can type in your county, but I want to take you, this is where I'm thinking about, like, how can you all leverage these data with stakeholders that you may or may not come in contact with, but you should. And this is my plug as a state senator. I think it's really important that you reach out to your elected officials. We are the ones that are making the decisions in terms of the budget, in terms of how much we're allocating towards the early childhood Block Grant, as well as home visiting and, developmental screenings and so on and so forth, early intervention. And so I think it's important, and especially, once I got into the Senate, I was like, we need to have these District 1 pagers. And so, just to give you an example, let me take you through the district I represent. I represent the Northwest side of Chicago. I'm going to click over here to Illinois Senate, and I'm going to look at here we go. Let's look at this in tabular format here. So right here, right, Illinois Senate District 20, right, there are 2,129 children eligible for preschool in the district I represent. However, this is my slot gap. We are short 158 seats. So thinking about how many classrooms that is, right? So it makes me kind of question like what's happening in the district, right? It makes me want to reach out to my providers and ask, what issues are you having with enrollment? Are you fully enrolled? Are you struggling with that? Which families, are not able to access and why? What are the reasons? And what resources do I need to advocate for so that every child has a seat? Is this an issue around outreach? Is this an issue around language access? Is this an issue around hesitancy to put your children in publicly funded pre-K because you have tia at home or abuela that can take care of your kid before they go to high school? Those are the types of questions it prompts me to ask. And further, I want to make sure you all have awareness around another tool that can be super duper helpful. So let's go over here. Oh, and also too, you know what? Did we even do this? No, that's not it. Okay, let me go back up to tools. So up here in the menu bar, right? Resources. We've got county and district profiles. So if you go here, you now can download for your own use a county one-pager or a district legislative district one-pager, right? So again, if I were to pick just a county here, let's go to Winnebago. And what you can see with this one pager, you're able to print this out for your own use. So I know some places across the state have early childhood collaborations where they sit down and they kind of plan as a community, for the early childhood needs. And I know this is like super small. Let me get this. Bam. Okay, here we go. So what you'll see in the one pagers here is you've got, again, little reminder what the risk and reach report is. And then it'll tell you what the overall risk level for the county is. In this case, Winnebago County is high. It'll also tell you like how many children are we talking about under the age of 5? So we got 21,000 children, right? And then it has the breakdown for each of these risk factors as well as the numeric value. So again, you're able to kind of like go through this and ask, some questions about what's happening here along with your reach. And what I also want to point out is this right here is the 2016 data. So you can compare side by side your one pagers for 2016 and 2019. The other one pager I want to bring your attention to, and this is what I'm talking about, if you're going to go visit your state legislator or if they're going to come and visit you, we've done the work for you. I can tell you, I love it when I go to a place and they're like, we have your district profile. I'm like, thank you very much. I am able to tangibly understand what folks I'm representing are experiencing here and how you're making the difference in that. So let's go to the district I represent. And what you'll see here, it's slightly different from that county profile, but I would say equally beneficial. And so what you can see here, and now, mind you, not all indicators were available at the legislative district level. So it's only the ones that we have access to at this unit of analysis. And so what you see here, is a comparable, right? So what I can look at in terms of parental employment, the number of and percent of children age 5 and under, that had no parent in the labor force has, gone down significantly, and it actually changed the risk level within the district I represent. The same with the number of children that are living below the 100% poverty level line, right? But the housing cost burden still remains high. And then we were not able to access the most recent data around homelessness. But what you can see is that the reach of the child care subsidy has increased, although my population more or less has been stagnant. And so kind of, again, prompts some questions, makes me ask some things, but this is, super helpful. Again, bird's eye view, me being able to understand as a legislator, how does this drill down in the community that I'm representing, and how can I use this as a conversation starter with the folks that I'm meeting with when I'm in site visits? And then how do I also, with my colleagues, because my colleagues in both the House and the Senate have this report as well. So also, when you go visit them, ask them, have you looked at the risk and reach report? I know you received a copy. Let's walk through it together. So, we want to set you all up for success. You all are the individuals who essentially know what time it is, because you are dealing with the next generation of Illinoisans who are going to take the reins from us and inherit this world. And so it is your distinct insight and perspective that is incredibly helpful for us at the state level. Plus, this data is meant to help inform how you may tailor the resources for the families that you serve. And so I'm going to stop right there and see if we have any questions, comments, feedback. I also want to just point out that when you go back to that website, there, if you noticed in the resource section, there was like a FAQ. That's a living document. The questions that you all ask, we add to that document so that we can continue to build out. It helps us understand like what's not translating, what needs more explanation, how do we tailor this so that ultimately folks can use it. Because like I said, nothing irritates me more than producing a pretty report that just sits on a shelf somewhere and somebody's like, oh, that's cute with all those baby photos. It's not a lookbook. It's a playbook. So I will stop right there to see if you all have any feedback, questions. I'm also willing to entertain larger questions that you all may have just in general about the field and, General Assembly and what we're trying to do around early childhood. Did I say it all? Left you guys speechless? All right. Nina, or Nina, I'm sorry. I'm reading it like it's Spanish. Nina is how I would say it, but I'm sorry. Please feel free to unmute yourself to ask your question about parental workshops.
Hi, it's Nina. You got it right. It is a Spanish name. I have a question with regards to parental workshops. I've been recently hired as a preschool coordinator for the district. And although we have some amazing workshops for the parents and we service, low income families, it's huge in this community. What are your thoughts on providing these parents with child abuse workshops? What are some of the signs, things of that nature? A lot of our parents, they work insane hours just to make ends meet, right? And they're giving their kids to either a neighbor, a relative, X, Y, and Z, right? And we know that the statistical facts are like 1 in 3 kids have endured some form of abuse, right? And you listed a handful of those risk factors. And that, like you said, it kind of houses that and it breeds that. So one kind of aligns with the other. So is it out of pocket to provide, workshops for the parents on, taking safe measures, ensuring that their children are in a safe environment, and to look out for signs from their children and kind of look at that early on prior, just for them to be privy of that? Because we know another stat that it's usually someone right? So I don't know, I'm a big advocate on that on a personal note. And so I was just trying to think of what's the hybrid on how we can kind of have the parents also look to the risk factors and kind of be a participant in this as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, so there's a couple thoughts I have on that. I do think it's definitely valuable information for parents. Now, a couple things you'll have to think through, because you said, parents are working insane hours and, are stretched. You got to think about the format of whatever you present and making it, accessible. And I know that, a lot of kind of spaces have gone to virtual formats because that's a little bit more convenient for families. But then again, you got to think about connectivity and devices and so on and so forth, right? So your community best. I think the best way to figure out, what the appropriate format is, obviously, is to, ask them directly, like, what is the way, right? Is it like 2-minute videos that they go right to their phone and they can watch, while they're washing dishes, or, is it an in-person thing? I used to work at a organization known as the Latino Policy Forum, and we had a parental engagement program known as Abriendo Puertas, opening doors. What was amazing about Abriendo Puertas is that it was designed in Spanish, but it was a fully bilingual program, and it could be, it was transferable to other cultures and identities. And what I loved about it is it was like, I think it was like about 12 modules, and it was meant for early childhood spaces in schools to utilize, to be able to kind of take parents through the progression of understanding child development and understanding, to your point, what are the places to look for where your children are being cared? Is it physically safe? Is it emotionally safe, socially productive, those types of things? But then also it took you through navigating, how to even pick a school for kindergarten, all of those things. But I love the way it was done because it was based on a popular education model that assumes that parents already have knowledge. Parents come to you with a wealth of information, talents, and skills. And really, the individual who was facilitating the workshop was really there to facilitate the sharing of knowledge amongst parents, or the conversations that would be provoked when this information was presented, so that you were also building a network amongst parents. Because that's another thing I think that is super key, right? It really does take a village, and having other parents that you can rely on and share information with. But with respect to the abuse and neglect specifically, you could, reach out to the Department of Children and Family Services, because they have those resources available, and they have been, and they will be able to, in some cases, either work with you to design a workshop that's specific to your parents, or they might have some existing resources. I know that, in my role, I've had to call DCFS about a couple of instances where I was looking around and I was working with a community-based organization about those specific issues. Like, what are your rights when DCFS comes? What are, to your point, what are the ways that, what are the signs? Like, for example, if your child's in care of somebody else and they're harming them, what can you do? Those things. So there is a department that can assist and aid you. And what I can do as a follow-up is find out who's the appropriate contact. And we can send that back to Cindy, so that she can get this out to the group. That is one of my jobs as state senator, is to connect folks to state resources. So
thank you so much. I appreciate you letting me know that that's not out of pocket to recommend that as a parental workshop. Thank you. That's really where I was going with it. I appreciate that.
Great. It looks like there's some questions in the chat. So what do you anticipate the passing of universal pre-K will have on Illinois, and how soon will we see that come down? So the universal pre-K proposal was in the Build Back Better framework. That still has not been passed, but is supposedly under consideration and discussion for this week and potentially next. I'm anticipating that if it does come through, there's likely to be a vote towards the end of the month. In terms of it getting the money, getting out the door and coming to Illinois, it's about to be a radical change. I mean, we haven't seen money like this in forever. And, you know, I've been really pushing that it's fabulous that we're going to get this money, but we really need to have a plan in place that is like squarely focused on workforce, because we have a significant vacancy issue. You all, I'm sure, are fully aware of that. The colleagues who work in the community-based settings are feeling that especially. The compensation piece is a joke. I mean, I don't know if you all knew, there was a bill that I was carrying last session and I passed a compromise of it. I initially introduced a bill to basically allow community colleges to seek approval from the Illinois Board of Higher Education to offer bachelor's degrees in early childhood specifically. That didn't go too well with our four-year universities. They felt a kind of way. But what it did is it allowed us to have a very honest conversation about the fact that we do not have as many people wanting to be in you all's positions for a variety of reasons. And so I pushed and I pressed, and where we landed is we ended up creating this early childhood higher education consortium, where you have your two-year institutions and your four-year universities now in a universal agreement where they have to, because now it's in statute, design programs meeting the needs of the incumbent workforce. We can't assume that all these high school graduates are going to run and want to be early childhood educators, but we have 28,000 individuals in this state that have less than a bachelor's degree and do want to achieve educational goals, but because you're working full-time, because you're earning nearly poverty wages, because you are place-based and you don't have the time to be going to night school and so on and so forth, we need to be thinking outside of the box and bring those opportunities and resources directly to the incumbent workforce. So two things that this consortium does that's game-changing. One, if you have an associate's degree in early childhood, you will get automatic junior standing at a four-year university. No more of this, oh, but you got to take this class and this class don't count, whatever. No, automatic, no questions, period, the end. The second thing that it's going to do, I was able to get $200 million to stand up this consortium so that we have 110 million of those dollars specifically for scholarships, for loan forgiveness, for transportation, for supplies, for everything. I'm talking about remove barriers, period, the end. And so, and then the actual institutions are going to have coaches and mentors, and there's going to be faculty development, so on and so forth, so that the objective is in 3 years, we will have up to 5,400 completers. So we have to close the gap ourselves on the workforce before we even start thinking about universal pre-K, because we can't even meet the needs of what we have right now. So good news is about the Build Back Better and the universal pre-K is that there is incentives and expectations around us using these funds to really bolster the workforce and to address the compensation problem, because it is embarrassing and it's exploitative of the labor that you all and the individuals you work with provide every single day. And so I think that when it comes down to when we'll actually feel the money and we'll feel that it's gonna probably take some time, because it's one, we've got to spend down these dollars, the 200 million that we have here. But two, you all probably have experienced this. Across the state, we're under enrolled. We have no business opening up new seats if we can't even get people to come to the seats that we currently have. And so that's why I'm not sure if you all have been following this, there is a early childhood transformation team that has been formed that the Governor's Office of Early Childhood Development has put together to lead the charge to strengthen, support, and create regional hubs. And these regional hubs are going to have councils of folks like you, as well as other stakeholders in the early childhood space, that some geographies might have these early childhood collaboratives already that are kind of thinking about strategic visioning and how do we address some of our chronic issues. But these regional hubs are meant to provide capacity for that and to better coordinate how the resources are allocated and distributed and so on and so forth. And so if you haven't heard about this, I would highly suggest that there's on the Governor's Office of Early Childhood website, there's a page dedicated to kind of breaking this down. And Cindy, I'm not sure if you have the deck that was just shared. There was okay, fabulous.
We do.
So, I mean, I think that the approach that we're taking as a state is smart, because I think it doesn't make sense to continue to add seats when we don't have everything filled. And especially when we don't even have the workforce to be able to add some seats. First things first, we got to take care of the people that take care of the kids and that educate our kids. So I think it's going to be a little bit of a runway before we actually see those dollars, because they'll probably, if they take a vote like at the end of this month, we probably won't start to see the dollars until sometime during the spring. And it's gonna, because as a state, we're being focused on the workforce, we may be working towards that first, and or transitioning, as you all may have heard this, to moving away from a competitive grant making process for funding early childhood to now contractual, so that we're not doing this. And I don't know how this affects, honestly, the school districts. I think it's a little bit different than our community-based organizations, but sorry, that was like a really long-winded answer. Okay, let me see questions here. We got the universal pre-K. Let's see. What are your thoughts about the tremendous teacher short as well? I think I just gave them. Do you have any specific thought of how we're to fix it or plans to support the field teacher? I also think that the addition of universal, okay, yes.
I think you can skip that one.
Okay, we're on the same page there. When will this be implemented? If you're talking about the consortium will be implemented. It is going to launch. It's actually technically right now, this past Monday, or was it the Monday before? The Monday before that, the scholarship program has opened up. So the Illinois Student Assistance Commission is the one that is administering the scholarships. So we can get you that page too. And so essentially, and it can be applied for this fall, which is awesome. So you may already be enrolled somewhere, you may know somebody who's enrolled, they can get those dollars. And moving forward, it'll be through the Illinois Student Assistance Commission. There is going to be an advisory committee of this consortium that will be meeting. I want to say it's next month, and they're subject to the Open Meetings Act as well. So like, if you're interested in terms of like how this is evolving, because to the question, like, we're going to need your input as well. And there's going to be public participation for these meetings. I will be on that committee, because I was like, hey, folks, I'm not going anywhere. I want to make sure this is implemented with fidelity and it's effective. So I'm going to be very involved. In fact, I'm meeting with the Board of Higher Ed tomorrow to be like, where are you guys at? Are folks appointed? How are our goals going? So on and so forth, because this is a tremendous issue across the state. Okay, so let's see. Shortage of staff and appropriate space are the biggest obstacles to expansion of early childhood classes. Better support from DCFS in which they can help classrooms open rather than serving as a roadblock would also help. Support that you've described to build the workforce would be an incredible help. So here's something else too. I'd like to just also provide, if I may, a tip. I have actually an early childhood center that's in district that I went to go visit last week. And they have 3 classrooms that are empty right now. They have a waiting list for families, but to your point, DCFS has not granted the change in their license. So this is where you can call up your legislators and say, look, we've got this situation, because what did I do? I said, put it in an email for me. I forwarded it to the DCFS liaison. I said, what's the problem? We've got 60 families right now that are hurting that we could serve. And we need to figure out ways to streamline it. And to your point, like as we're thinking about the workforce piece, we do need to think about how do we, if licensing is going to stay in DCFS, how do we streamline these processes? Because I just can't understand why we have delays. Basically, this provider had been putting in this request since July, and here we are in November. That is a shame. Okay, let me see what else I got here. To maintain workforce in classroom, we need to critically examine the workload of classroom teachers. The requirements are exceptionally high and not feasible in an 8-hour workday. Yeah, I mean, I think on some of that tip, we need to think about, I've been thinking about this too, right? So in school districts, we've been talking about how the additional funds that you've received through the ESSER grants have been able to help with staffing your classrooms, having more adults in the classrooms, and not the typical ratio. You can increase the number of adults because of all the concerns around learning recovery and so on and so forth. I'd love to see that stay. I just really think that when you have more adults on hand and when you're able to provide that differentiated support, but I'd like to think about like, how can we ensure that that it is sustainable over time. And so, I think to your point about the 8-hour, it's draining. It's no joke. We had this program at Erickson, this leadership program called the Early Childhood Leadership Academy. And we have a specific track that's for executives. So your elected officials, your judges, law enforcement, state agency folks, school board members, superintendents. They spend several days with us at Erickson, and we really go deep into child development science. And so they understand that lens and how to apply it. One of the things we ask them to do is to spend half a day shadowing an early childhood professional. So we don't tell them where they're going till the day of. We get them to the place, we give them a 1-pager on the community that's being served and the institution, so on and so forth. And we tell them, this is not a, shake hand, kiss babies type of deal. You're going to do the work. And we give them a job description of what they're supposed to be doing, right? So we drop them off at 8, we stay with them to make sure that they're good. And then they have lunch with the folks that they're shadowing. And we do the whole gamut. We do site directors, lead teachers, infant toddler specialists, case managers, everybody. They get to see for real what the deal is. They come back to Erickson exhausted. And that was only a half day. And then to drive home the point, we give them a fake check. And we say, this is how much you would have made if you were in this position. That floors them every single time. And so I think, there is some opportunity to further explore to that point, like an 8-hour day, like what does that look like? How would we operationalize it? How would we ensure that that's a resource we can afford every community? But ultimately, as you all know, the work is no joke. This is not babysitting in any way, shape, or form. This is straight magic making. This is, human capacity building. Okay, so yes. Oh Lord, high school counselors advise their students to avoid early childhood because the pay is low. That's the problem. That is totally the problem. And I mean, can you blame them? But that's why we have to be loud and insistent and unapologetic that this is critical work. I mean, for me, I'd prefer our early childhood folks to make six figures, call it a day. The contribution is tremendous. Therefore, it should be commensurate with the compensation. And so I think there's going to be opportunity with this Build Back Better plan to really we're supposed to be doing a wage analysis, and not this, oh, we only have this pot of money and therefore we're going to then break it down for how much folks are going to get paid. No, we are going to assess what is the true cost of the provision of high quality services, and that's what we have to get the money for. Okay, in terms of slots capacity, has there been any discussion around decreasing class sizes to 15? I have been on a number of meetings with leaders, and this has been an area of discussion. Smaller, yes. I don't know if that is, on the docket for discussion, but I think it could be, as we plan for, Build Back Better and have some, community conversations and say, this is something you should raise. Scholarship program. If you are a part of the early childhood education workforce looking to further your credentials, degree, blah, blah, may you be able. Yes. Oh, thank you. Veronica. Hello. Appreciate you. Yes, thank you. Okay. Are there plans to do an update of the Illinois Risk and Reach report with data that shows the impact of COVID? Yes, absolutely. That is the plan. We want to do this every 2 years. So hopefully the next iteration, we have a complete and high quality data set to be able to do that. But, I think at least what you can, look at is the fact that we have the baseline. So we know times were rough before COVID. You can only imagine that the areas that were already acute are feeling it even more. Yeah, the application said coming soon for the consortium. This is such a great step for, okay, yes. So just be on the lookout. I'll make sure that Cindy gets the blast from me. I even had the Senate make a commercial on it because I was like, we're going to get this out here. I went out to go interview my providers. I was like, since y'all didn't let me get this community college bachelor's degree, we're about to blow this up. Okay, let's see what else. Our entire staff has been chasing their tails tirelessly. We are a PFA program. To meet the needs of children in our class, we really need to increase the ratio of staff to students are very demanding. Let's make sure that you amplify that message in the discussions around the plan. And I think I've gotten through all the questions, and I think we're just about at time, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, I think you did, Christina. Thank you so much. And I'm going to turn it over to Susie to make some final announcements, but thank you so much for this session and joining us and giving us your time. And we'll look forward to getting all those links that you're going to send us. And Susie works on our team, and we'll make sure that you get the links in the follow-up email. So thanks to you, Christina, and thanks to you, Veronica, for being her assistant as well in all of this and giving us the information. Go ahead, Susie.
Okay, great. Thank you, Cindy. Thanks again, everybody. I did put a few notes in the chat room in regards to the follow-up email that you will be receiving and what it will entail. And what we basically would like to do is have you mark your calendars now and save the dates for our next 2 administrator forums. The one is January 26th. And that will be focusing on mental health. And then February 9th, that will be family engagement framework. And both of those sessions, again, will be from the 1 o'clock to the 2:30 timeframe. And again, in the chat, I did indicate that we will be sending a follow-up email. So it will include the recording and how you will be able to access the recording from today's session, as well as some of our past sessions that we have had and other webinars. And that would be found on our YouTube channel. So you will get some information in regards to that. And I think that is about all. I don't think we have anything else shared this time. Just be sure to watch our website at eclearningil.org, and that website